Over the course of years, Huawei, through its executives and others, repeatedly claimed to U.S. government officials and various banks that the company, its subsidiaries and partners operated in accordance with U.S. sanctions and export laws and in accordance with EU and UN sanctions. As charged in the indictment, those claims were false. Similarly, Huawei executives' employees made false statements to both the FBI and the United States Congress. As part of Huawei's schemes, Ms. Meng personally made statements to one of Huawei's major banking partners about the company's operations in Iran. As alleged in the indictment, those statements were false. It is important to understand that Ms. Meng has been charged based upon her own personal conduct and not because of actions or misconduct by other Huawei employees. The Eastern District of New York, like the entire Justice Department, is committed to the rule of law. On a daily basis, we hold American companies and their executives accountable for violations of the law. We should and will do the same with foreign companies and their executives, no matter how well connected those companies may be. I want to thank the AUSAs in my office, Alex Solomon, Julia Nestor, David Kessler, Caitlin Farrell, and Sarah Evans, as well as our colleagues in the National Security and Criminal Divisions here in Washington, and our partners in the FBI, HSI, DOD, and the Treasury and Commerce Departments for their extraordinary and continuing efforts in this case. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Let me thank the Acting Attorney General and everyone behind me for the collective work here today. As you heard from the Attorney General this afternoon in the Western District of Washington, a 10-count indictment was unsealed, charging trade theft, charging wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and forfeiture. The indictment in the Western District of Washington reveals just how determined Huawei was to steal T-Mobile's trade secrets, how clearly Huawei knew that what it was doing was wrong, and just how far Huawei was willing to go to get the technology it wanted. As set forth in the indictment, our evidence includes numerous emails between Huawei USA and Huawei China over a period of months, showing a determined and unrelenting effort to obtain T-Mobile technology. In this case, a robot, nicknamed Tappy, that T-Mobile used to test mobile phones to ensure they met expectations in the marketplace. As alleged in the indictment, the emails show that Huawei wanted to build its own robot, and rather than engineer its own device, it decided to steal T-Mobile's technology. What do we allege that Huawei did? T-Mobile had given Huawei employees limited access to Tappy to test Huawei's phones, but only subject to agreements strictly prohibiting any conduct to obtain Tappy technology. The emails clearly show a determined Huawei doing everything it could to get what it was told it could not have. Huawei entities snuck into the Tappy lab with folks who were not authorized to be there. Huawei entities directed employees to take photographs, take measurements, and take other protected information without permission. And finally, when all this still did not get them what they were looking for, they tried to steal Tappy's robotic arm in order for engineers in China to replicate it. To make matters worse, when confronted, Huawei obstructed justice by preparing a report claiming to be an investigation of rogue employees when Huawei clearly knew that the thefts were part of an organized effort by the company. In fact, as the indictment details, this was the way Huawei operated. This was Huawei's MO. During the time period of the alleged crimes, Huawei announced a bonus program for its employees worldwide that it would pay cash to employees for stealing confidential information from competitors. And yet, and very tellingly, within days of this offer, Huawei USA sent an email to its employees acknowledging this conduct would be illegal in the United States. Let me end by emphasizing, as the Attorney General did as well, our indictment contains allegations. Huawei, like every defendant in a criminal case, has the right to due process, including a trial. We look forward to proving our case beyond a reasonable doubt and holding Huawei accountable for its actions. And let me finish just by thanking as well not only the FBI and the other law enforcement agencies that were involved in this work, but the AUSAs in my office, Todd Greenberg and Tom Woods, and a number of other folks who supported them on this case as we got the indictment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate all those remarks, and I just want to again thank all of our law enforcement partners and all the cabinet secretaries and others, divisions of the Department of Justice, U.S. Attorney's Office for great work. And as we all know, and once a company or an individual is indicted, that's when the work really begins and the trial lawyers get to do their things. But I'll turn it over to Carrie to direct traffic here.
Yeah. Question number one for AG Whitaker. If they're convicted of all these charges, should this company be allowed to operate in the U.S. market? And then I have a follow-up question on a different topic for the FBI director.
Sure. I think the best people to answer that are the U.S. attorneys as to what the potential ramifications of this behavior is. But let me start by saying, the United States has a very well-defined process for allowing people to, that are convicted of crimes continue to participate in our economy. I think we're well before that, and other departments would have direct input. I don't know if Secretary Ross, if you want to have any additional comments on that, or just leave it at that.
No, we don't comment on pending investigations.
Yeah.
Director Ray, you gave a very passionate speech to the FBI personnel about the shutdown in terms of how it impacted them. What message are you going to send to the White House and to Congress about the effect and the impact of the shutdown, and how are you going to work hard to prevent another one?
Well, for now, I'm just very happy that all 37,000 of the great men and women of the FBI are back at work and going to get paid this week, which is what's best for everybody. And I'll just leave it at that for now.
Mr. Whitaker, how are Huawei's actions undermining U.S. security? I understand the trade secrets argument, but what about the sanctions argument? And when you put them all together, is it clear that this is just rogue employees, or is this the way the company does business?
Well, we have allegations in two indictments that were unsealed today, both in the Eastern District of New York and the Western District of Washington. And the behavior in both those cases allege more than just rogue employees. It alleges corporate-sponsored behaviors that were, as the first assistant from the Western District of Washington pointed out, are alleged to have been directed as a corporate policy. And so I think these are very serious actions by a company that appears to be using corporate espionage and sanctions violation to not only enhance potentially their bottom line, but also to compete in the world economy. And this is something that the United States will not stand for. And it's just, we're going to continue to investigate and prosecute these types of cases, because ultimately it undermines the the national security and the economic security of our country.
Thank you. So first question on China, then a follow-up on a separate, if I could. We've been told today that this was an organized long-term effort by the Huawei executives. Could any of it have happened without the blessing of the Chinese Communist government?
We don't allege any action by the Chinese government, although I think Director Ray, you're happy to speak more about the connection between the company and the state.
Well, as the acting attorney general said, there's no conduct alleged in the indictment about the Chinese government. I will say, though, that it is public record that under Chinese cybersecurity law, Chinese companies like Huawei are required to provide essentially access upon demand with little to no process to challenge that. And so that's why it creates the national security implications that we're concerned about.
Just have a follow-up for A.G. Whitaker. Republicans have complained that other witnesses in the course of their Russia and email investigations have lied or misled Congress. Is it Robert Mueller's responsibility to investigate those allegations, or is it yours?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, the Mueller investigation has a very defined scope, and so anything outside of that scope would have to either be the scope would have to be enhanced to bring additional matters to be investigated by the Mueller investigation. But obviously, if it's not given to that investigation by an increasing in the scope of the investigation, it would be retained by the Department of Justice. We take very seriously lying to Congress, and if there are referrals made by the appropriate committees, as is ordinary course for matters like this, then we would investigate that as we would anything else.
Secretary Ross.
Just two quick questions. One, has the Justice Department formally filed its extradition request for Ms. Meng? And also, the president once raised the specter of her extradition being, possibly playing a role in the upcoming trade talks. Is that possibility now closed, given the strength of this enforcement action?
In talking to U.S. Attorney Donahue, we plan to file our formal extradition request and all the necessary documentation under the extradition treaty in the appropriate time frame, which I believe is the 30th, right?
Yes, sir.
Tomorrow. So we expect to comply with that. What was your second question? I'm sorry.
And also, the president once raised the idea that Ms. Meng's extradition could be used in the trade talks that are forthcoming. Is that possibility now closed, given this enforcement action?
So the U.S. Department of Justice does its investigations and its charging decisions independent from the White House. And we pursued this when the evidence and the facts caused us to seek an indictment from the grand jury, and the grand jury returned an indictment.
Paula, you say that you filed this when the facts led you to seek an indictment, but Huawei has been a concern in Washington for a decade. I mean, Taffy was dismembered 7 years ago. What has taken the Justice Department?
How sad that statement is, that Taffy was dismembered. I mean, that's...
I feel for Taffy, but it's a serious question. Why has it taken the Justice Department so long to pursue this kind of case against Huawei? I mean, arguably, even back in 2012, perhaps T-Mobile should have known better than to allow Huawei engineers into their factories.
Again, we conducted the investigation, and maybe the first assistant from the Western District of Washington wants to add some additional information as to when the investigation started. But fundamentally, the way the Department of Justice works is we predicate an investigation. Once the investigation is predicated, we pursue all the means of investigation we have, whether it's search warrants, whether it's other investigative interviews, other investigative manners, and we do these things as an ordinary course of business. This one of the things that I think was emphasized but needs to be re-emphasized is these two cases, while we are announcing them today and they concern essentially the same company and different behaviors by the same company, are Department of Justice actions. We do our cases independent from the federal government writ large, because that's the way the criminal system has to be. And there's kind of a tried and true system and regular order that we follow at the Department of Justice. And I think anybody trying to connect dots otherwise, it's just we're looking for things that aren't there, because this is just the way we do our business every day.
Before you came into your current role, you were publicly very critical of the special counsel investigation. Now, since you have received your briefings, is there anything that you've seen or read that gives you concern about special counsel Robert Mueller or his investigation?
I've been fully briefed on the investigation, and I look forward to Director Mueller delivering the final report. And I really am not going to talk about open and ongoing investigation otherwise, but sort of the statements that I made were as a private citizen, only with publicly available information. And I am comfortable that the decisions that were made are going to be reviewed, either through the various means we have. But right now, the investigation is, I think, close to being completed, and I hope that we can get the report from Director Mueller as soon as possible.
That's all we have time for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.